Hello, welcome back to part 2 of our programme that's all about Norway and the Arctic. We're here next to the historic polar exploration ship, the Fram, in Oslo. Now this month, key stakeholders in the Arctic region are meeting for the Arctic Frontiers Conference that's taking place in Tromsø, further north in Norway. With me to tell us more about that is the Director of Arctic Frontiers, OVRETVEIT. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Now, first off then, Arctic Frontiers bills itself as an organisation that brings the world to the Arctic and the Arctic to the world. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, it means for a start that we bring the world to the main conference that we're doing in Tromsø in the third week of January. We bring some 36 nationalities and some 3,500 delegates to discuss sustainable, knowledge-based development of societies and business in the Arctic. In addition, we also bring the Arctic to the world with seminars that we do other places in Norway and other places around the globe.
We know that the Arctic is warming up at least twice as quickly as any other part of the planet currently. Looking specifically at Norway, many scientists, including the head of Norway's Institute for Marine Research, who we spoke to, say that new oil and gas exploration in the Arctic does pose a big risk to these fragile ecosystems and also gives the world more fossil fuels to burn and emit climate-damaging emissions. By pursuing this route, isn't Norway and other countries that are doing the same thing really shooting themselves in the foot?
Well, I think at least that when these new areas are opening up and being accessible for industrial activity and various kinds, I think it's just really important that the processes, the industrial processes, are based on scientific facts and good assessments, if they are done at all. Which is also a reason to get together at meeting places like Arctic Frontiers when we get the knowledge and the development together.
But essentially, zero risk in this kind of industry doesn't exist, does it?
Well, zero risk, I would say, doesn't exist anywhere with these activities.
Now, of course, I think everybody knows that a huge part of Norway's GDP comes from oil and gas exploration and exports. But Norway is also quite strong in renewable energies as well. Considering all of this concern about the climate and global warming, isn't renewable perhaps a better path for Norway in terms of what it would mean for its Arctic territory?
I know there are operations to start with wind power offshore on the continental shelf, and also there has been studies at least done on tidal power and experiments on wave power. Unsuccessful this far, but hopefully one day there will be that will be a solution, because of course there's enormous power in the waves.
Now, another impact of the Arctic ice melt is new transport routes opening, talking about the northeastern passage. China openly stating that it wants to create an Arctic Silk Road. But there is scepticism about how feasible this actually is and how dangerous. Is it close to becoming a reality?
Of course, it would mean a lot both for the trade between the two continents, but also for the climate, because it would be shorter transportation routes and less fuel spent.
Less fuel spent, but perhaps also in itself something that could cause damage to the region?
Well, of course, it has the potential of it might be more dangerous with if accidents were to happen in this region. So that's of course the part of the picture.
Now, it is an area where there are rich mineral deposits. As much as a quarter of the world's undiscovered fossil fuels believed to be within the Arctic Circle. We know that often where there's oil, there's a bit of a row over it, to say the least. We know that Russia has increased its military presence in the region. NATO has been carrying out major military exercises in the north of Norway. How worried should we be about a new kind of a Cold War over the Arctic?
From my perspective, that's a bit pessimistic or a bit dramatic. Talking about territorial claims, there are some unresolved areas, but my impression is that the 8 Arctic countries are very much clear on that these will be resolved in accordance with the law of the sea, the UNCLOS, and within sort of the Arctic 8 framework.
While we're on this sort of geopolitical theme, we do now, of course, have a president of the United States in the White House who has openly said he believes climate change is a myth invented by the Chinese. How hard does that make the job of trying to get some coherent policy on this region where climate change is proven to be having an impact?
Well, I think all the more important the work that we're doing. We will be discussing the importance of having policies, political strategies, governments based on science and on facts, which we see is attacked not only along the lines of climate, but also in other areas in the world today.
We're just looking to the future. There have been efforts by some of the countries with Northeast Atlantic interests to create a marine protected area within the Arctic. That has been blocked by Norway, Denmark and Iceland. Now, Greenpeace, the environmental activism group, says that there's no reason to hold off on creating this kind of protected zone. Is this prospect looking any likelier at this point?
Well, I'm not from my perspective. Of course, the East Atlantic is an area where these 3 countries that you mentioned have had as very important fishing grounds all through, well, the last couple of 100 years. So the way that I see it, I think it would be very hard to persuade these 3 countries to comply to such a regime.
Is there an argument, however, that if this area isn't protected, then all of the wealth that these countries are taking out of the Arctic could itself at some point be damaged beyond repair, thinking about fishing stocks?
Well, I think if you look at the Norwegian fishing regime or the way that the management of the Norwegian fishing stocks, it has proved to be a very sound and solid way of both balancing, protecting the stocks on one side, but at the same time harvesting them enough so they will keep stable and sound.
Well, Uli OVRETVETT, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, we will leave Norway behind us, continuing the programme here in Paris with a guest who knows both polar regions far better than most. I'm very pleased to welcome to the studio today a Frenchman who has not just been to both poles, but also has several polar milestones to his name. In 1986, he became the first man to ski solo to the North Pole with aerial assistance. He's also completed the longest crossing of the Antarctic, 6,300 kilometres, with sled dogs and an international team of explorers for company. Jean-Louis Etienne, thank you very much for being with us.
Hello.
For a lot of us, the North Pole, the Arctic, it conjures up very evocative images of Santa Claus and polar bears.
Yes.
What's it really like for you being up there on your own?
First of all, very cold. In a tent one night, I had minus 52 Celsius, which is very, very cold. The other thing is, the North Pole, you have to understand, is in the middle of an ocean, a frozen ocean. And the sea ice drifts from the Bering Strait, from Alaska on the other side, North Pole, and comes to Canada and Greenland. So when you start from north of Canada, the ice is very rough. You cannot see the horizon. You have to pull your sled. And every day at the beginning, I said, what I'm doing here? What sort of dream? It was not a real dream. It was so difficult. And sometimes I said, I would like to stop.
I bet.
Yes, but day after day, I begin to understand how the ice move. because what is dangerous is the ice breaks sometime and it freezes again.
Yeah.
And you have to cross in a place where the ice is very thin and the sea ice is flexible. So when you walk on a flexible ice, so you say, well, yes, what to do? Yeah. So at the beginning it was very difficult, very scary. And then I became sort of polar man.
Well, it sounds absolutely terrifying, I have to say. You have been to the Arctic many times. The last time was 3 years ago when you flew over the Arctic Sea in a balloon.
I flew across the Arctic Ocean with a balloon from Svalbard, North Pole, and the plan was to land in Alaska, but the wind pushed me toward Siberia. Mm-hmm. Anyway, what I realized is it was in April. April means the end of the winter. And I saw a lot of ice.
Did it look like this?
Less. I mean, it was more ice than water. But in April, most of the time, the ocean is covered by the sea ice. But I found some place with open water. That's because of the global warming.
Well, quite. I wanted to ask you. You have then seen yourself evidence of global warming.
Yeah,
what
the
kind
evolution.
of thing?
For example, when I went to the pole in '86, the thickness of the sea ice was close to 2 meters. Mm-hmm. Now it's 1.2 meters.
Wow. It's much half gone.
Yeah. It melts. Mm-hmm. And every summer, at the end of the summer, the satellite shows an image where the sea ice, the surface is decreasing.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you always been interested in environmental causes, or was it exploration that brought you to this interest?
I've been since almost 40 years in the polar region. So when you are going to the polar region, the people ask you, is the ice melting? I say, yes, I can tell you, the ice is melting. For example, I crossed the Antarctic Ocean. That's the other expedition.
Of course.
It's the size of United States and Mexico combined. And it's covered with a piece of ice of 2.5 kilometers, the thickness, I crossed this continent in 1890. The first 600 kilometers, we call that Larsen ice shelf. The ice come from the mountains, mm-hmm. and it's floating ice platform. Yeah, this is typical floating ice. Mm-hmm. And the first 600 kilometers, they have disappeared.
Wow.
That means it's a reality. Yeah, the global warming. Yeah.
Well, just coming back to the Arctic, global warming, freeing up new areas of Arctic territory where there can be new industry, oil, gas exploration, transport. How worried are you about damage to the environment from this moving in of industry?
Talking with the French oil company Total, the president said we will not exploit the oil, because the leak of mm-hmm. oil will be catastrophic. Mm-hmm. They plan to exploit only the gas, and which is not a problem in case of leaks. Yeah, but what is difficult is nobody is allowed to say to the countries around the Arctic Ocean, the Russians, Canada, United States, and please leave this oil in the shore. They have the rights.
It's a commercial decision.
It's the commercial, and they have the rights to exploit this gas.
And do you believe that these minerals will then be exploited to a great extent? Yeah,
I hope not, but yes, I think so, because the transition between the fossil fuel and other things, it will take times, and we will probably need this gas for the transition. Yeah, but they have really to take care, because if there is a leak of oil, can you imagine a polar bear coming through the ice, black cover? Yeah, it will be catastrophic for the company.
And very hard to clean up as well, because it's so very remote.
Impossible to clean up.
Really?
It's possible, for example, in the warm, hot sea, Mexican Gulf, for example, because the bacteria, they eat when the temperature is close to 20, 25 degrees. But in this cold water, it will be not possible. The gas will stay there for a long period of time.
Well, we just briefly touched on another concern about the Arctic, those countries around the Arctic that have territorial claims.
Yeah.
And as that ice
It's not
is
claims,
shrinking...
there are the rights too.
The rights. Well,
Yeah.
there are overlapping claims as well. When you're actually up at the North Pole, isn't it somewhat arbitrary which bit sort of belongs to whom, or are you impacted by that?
Well, normally the international rule of the sea gave to you the freedom to exploit the gas or the water and the ground of the ocean until 200 miles from your shore. So this is an international rule, you know. People say sometimes the global warming will give the access to the exploitation of the gas. It's not the global warming. It will always be ice because during the winter, the ocean freeze. It will be when the barrel, the oil, will be high enough in order to be profitable. Yeah, that's the reason.
So are you concerned that there could be disputes over these increasingly valuable
In some places.
minerals?
The Russians, they try to prove they have until the North Pole. You know, talking with some politician in Moscow, they say, this belongs to us. This is North Pole, and this is a shore. Could be some dispute, yes.
Well, Jean-Louis Etienne, thank you very much for being our guest here on Talking Europe.
It's a pleasure. Thank
It's
you.
been great to talk to you, and good luck for your future expeditions.
Thank you.
Thank you as well for watching the programme. We'll see you very soon here on France 24.